The Middle East, a region steeped in history, fraught with tension and a tinderbox where even a small spark could ignite a global firestorm. Today we explore one such potential spark, a direct conflict between Israel and Iran. The potential for a direct confrontation between these two nations represents a threat that extends far beyond the region. From energy markets to the risk of a broader international conflict, the stakes are incredibly high. Imagine waking up one morning to headlines screaming about skyrocketing oil prices. That's just the tip of the iceberg if war erupts between Israel and Iran. Iran sits on the edge of the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway through which a third of the world's oil supply flows. A conflict would almost certainly disrupt this vital artery of global commerce. Oil tankers, stranded, unable to deliver their precious cargo. The price of oil, already volatile, would explode. For countries heavily reliant on oil imports, the impact would be immediate and severe. Transportation costs would skyrocket, inflation would soar, and the cost of everyday goods and services would become crippling for millions. Industries dependent on oil and gas, from manufacturing to agriculture, would face crippling costs and potential shutdowns. The global supply chain, already strained, could collapse under the weight of this sudden disruption. Europe, heavily reliant on Russian gas, could find itself caught in the middle of this conflict, facing pressure to take sides and potentially facing energy shortages. The economic fallout from a disruption in energy markets would be swift and brutal, impacting every corner of the globe. Governments would be forced to take drastic measures to stabilize their economies and mitigate the suffering of their citizens. The interconnected nature of our global economy means that a conflict in the Middle East has the potential to impact us all. Picture this. News of an Israeli strike on Iranian nuclear facilities flashes across television screens. Global stock markets, already on edge, plunge into freefall. Investors, panicked by the uncertainty and potential for global chaos, dump their holdings, triggering a chain reaction across financial markets. The Dow Jones, the Nasdaq, the FTSE, all major indices plummet. Retirement accounts dwindle, businesses struggle to secure loans, and the global economy teeters on the brink. Oil importing countries, already grappling with rising energy costs, would face economic devastation. The interconnectedness of the global financial system means that a crisis in one region can quickly spread, like a virus, to others. Banks, fearing a wave of defaults, would tighten lending, further choking off economic activity. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, and other global financial institutions would be called upon to provide emergency loans and stabilize struggling economies. But their resources are finite, and the scale of this potential crisis could overwhelm their capacity to respond effectively. Businesses would delay expansion plans, consumers would cut back on spending, and the global economy would grind to a halt. In a world already grappling with the economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic, a war in the Middle East could be the final straw, pushing the global economy into a deep and protracted recession. The Middle East is a powder keg, and a war between Israel and Iran could be the spark that ignites a regional conflagration. Iran, unable to match Israel's military might conventionally, would likely turn to its network of proxies across the region. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, all would be activated, opening up multiple fronts in this expanding conflict. Israel, facing rocket attacks from Lebanon and Gaza, would be forced to retaliate, widening the conflict and drawing in more actors. The United States, a staunch ally of Israel, would be compelled to act, providing military aid and potentially deploying troops to the region. Russia and China, both seeking to expand their influence in the region, would see an opportunity to advance their interests. Russia, already a major player in Syria, could increase its military support for the Assad regime, further destabilizing the region. China, with its growing economic ties to the Middle East, could use the crisis to secure favorable energy deals and strengthen its foothold in a region crucial to global trade. Miscalculations, unintended consequences, and the fog of war could all contribute to a wider regional conflict, drawing in global powers and threatening to engulf the entire Middle East in flames. The humanitarian crisis would be catastrophic, with the potential to destabilize the entire region and create a ripple effect of instability that would be felt far beyond the Middle East. The specter of nuclear war hangs heavy over any discussion of an Israel-Iran conflict. While neither country officially confirms possessing nuclear weapons, Israel is widely believed to have a nuclear arsenal, and Iran's nuclear ambitions are no secret. A direct conflict could push Iran to accelerate its nuclear program, viewing a nuclear deterrent as its only guarantee of survival against a perceived existential threat. The international community, already deeply concerned about Iran's nuclear program, would face its worst nightmare. Israel, facing the prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran, might feel compelled to launch preemptive strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. Such an attack, while potentially delaying Iran's nuclear program, could have devastating consequences. The release of radioactive material from damaged nuclear facilities could contaminate vast areas, causing widespread environmental damage and long-term health problems. The international community would condemn such an attack, further isolating Israel and potentially leading to sanctions. Other countries in the region, fearing for their own security, might be tempted to develop their own nuclear weapons, triggering a regional nuclear arms race. The nightmare scenario of full-blown nuclear exchange is still unlikely. But the fact that it's even a possibility is a testament to the grave dangers posed by this conflict. War is always a humanitarian disaster, but a conflict between Israel and Iran would be particularly devastating, unleashing a wave of human suffering that would engulf the entire region. Imagine millions of people displaced from their homes, fleeing the fighting and seeking refuge in neighboring countries already struggling to cope with their own challenges. Families torn apart, homes reduced to rubble, lives shattered by the indiscriminate violence of war. Refugee camps would swell beyond capacity, straining resources and creating breeding grounds for disease and despair. The international community would be called upon to provide humanitarian aid, but the scale of the crisis would test the limits of global compassion and resources. The burden on neighboring countries, many already struggling with political instability and economic hardship, would be immense. Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, all would face an influx of refugees, stretching their resources thin and potentially destabilizing their own fragile societies. Europe, still grappling with the aftermath of the 2015 refugee crisis, would brace for another wave of desperate people seeking safety and a better life. The political fallout could be significant, fueling anti-immigrant sentiment and strengthening the hand of far-right parties. But beyond the numbers, beyond the statistics, lie the individual stories of loss, resilience, and hope. These are the human faces of war, the innocent victims caught in the crossfire of a conflict they did not choose. The prospect of a Third World War, once confined to the realm of dystopian fiction, has become an uncomfortable topic of conversation in recent years. While still unlikely, the possibility of a conflict between Israel and Iran escalating into a global conflagration cannot be entirely dismissed. Imagine a world on edge where long-simmering tensions between global superpowers ignite, fueled by the flames of a Middle Eastern war. The United States, bound by treaty obligations and a deep-seated alliance with Israel, would be drawn into the conflict, facing off against Iran and its allies. Russia, seeing an opportunity to weaken the West and expand its own sphere of influence, might increase its military support for Iran, potentially leading to a direct confrontation with US forces. China, with its growing military might and global ambitions, could be drawn into the conflict, either in support of Iran or seeking to exploit the chaos to advance its own interests. Cyber warfare, already a significant threat, would play a central role in any global conflict. Imagine critical infrastructure crippled, financial markets plunged into chaos, and communication networks brought to their knees by sophisticated cyber attacks. The line between conventional and nuclear warfare could blur as nations consider the use of tactical nuclear weapons in a desperate attempt to gain the upper hand. The consequences, both intended and unintended, would be catastrophic, potentially leading to a global nuclear winter and the collapse of civilization as we know it. While a World War III scenario remains unlikely, the potential for miscalculation, the fog of war, and the unpredictable nature of conflict mean that we cannot afford to be complacent. The potential conflict between Israel and Iran is a sobering reminder of how interconnected our world is. The economic, humanitarian, and geopolitical consequences would be severe, reaching far beyond the borders of the Middle East. We must demand that our leaders prioritize diplomacy, dialogue, and peaceful solutions to international disputes. The stakes are too high, the potential consequences too dire, to allow ourselves to sleepwalk into another devastating war.